Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how to do error handling in a SvelteKit app. We'll go over the different types of errors and provide ways to handle them that are better for your end users. We'll start off by creating a blank Svelte app using their provided npx script. The only thing I'm going to add here is the Tailwind CSS support so we can style the app easily. Then we can drill into that new folder and open the folder in VS Code using code-n period. In the new window, let's reopen our terminal and do npm install to install dependencies. And let's run the app with npm run dev to make sure it's working. Now let's go over the different types of errors that might happen. There's validation errors, which are typically just messages provided to the user, such as the email you entered is not valid. Then you can have expected errors. These are ones that are created by you in your code, such as checking for if a database connection failed or a page not found error. And SvelteKit provides an error function to do this, but it'll do different things depending on where it's called, as we'll see later. And then there's unexpected errors, which can be an error thrown using JavaScript's throw new error, or perhaps a syntax error, or invalid types, and so on. These usually show up with the internal error message and the 500 status code. Let's start off by going over validation errors. Let's make a simple form in our main SvelteKit page. I'm using Tailwind classes to give the page a gray background and create a centered white box for our form. Then I'll add a header and an input field with a submit button and apply some styling to that. When you add Tailwind to your app, all the default styles get stripped out, so you need to create your own, even on simple things like borders around the text inputs. Then we'll wrap this in a form and set the action to /submit form, the method to post, and we'll use the use enhance action to do something with the form submission. Svelte's form enhancement is a way to have the form's submit behavior act like a standard JavaScript form, but without the page appearing to be reloading. So in there we have a callback function that lets us do something with the result of the form submission. And in here, we're going to check for all the possible responses we could get. We'll check for a successful response, which also has the status of 200. We'll check for a redirect response, which might happen if the user's session ended in the meantime and they need to log in again. You can check out one of my login tutorial videos for how that could possibly happen. Then finally, we'll check for any errors. The result here might be one of Svelte's built-in error responses, and if that's true, we'll display that message. Or it might happen to be a custom message sent back for some other reason, so that'll be the default if it wasn't a Svelte error. Now let's make the script that handles the form submission. That'll be a new plus page server TS file under the same folder. In that file, we'll create a function that matches the action name, which was submit form. Then we can add the request parameter to the function, then use that object to get the form data. And then from the form data, we can get the individual inputs like the email. To test our validation error, we can just check to see if the email input even exists. We need to convert it to a string next because currently it's a form data entry value object. And then just for testing, we can see if it does not end in slateapp.dev. We'll also just make sure it's not blank. Be aware when combining and or operators like this, there's an order of operations like in school math, the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally type things. So always wrap the statements you want checked together in parentheses, or you might end up with some unexpected results that are hard to debug. If either of those is true, we'll return Svelte's built-in fail function, and that wants a status code. And for validation errors, a 400 status code is common. And it also wants the details of the error, and Svelte's default functionality is to have the error message in a message property. Then last, we'll just return success true if the email is good. Back on the main page, to make it look nicer, I'm going to show a pre-made loading animation when submitted. and we'll also turn the loader off after it's done. And then we'll show our error in a nice little red box I've created previously. Over here you can see the component files and matching store files here. To use these, we just need to add the components to our layout svelte file, which is a file that gets applied to every page in that folder. But the error display could also just be a simple JavaScript alert box as well if you wanted. Here I just wanted to make the UI look a little bit nicer and consistent. We'll also show a green box if the submission was successful. Now if we submit the form with no email or a bad email, we get a nice error message for the user like this. And if we do it correctly, we get the green message instead. Now let's go over expected errors. An expected error is one thrown using the svelte error function. It also reacts differently depending on where you use it. So on a form action like this, it'll just get returned, and then you manually need to do something with this. Notice how it looks exactly like our validation error. But if you use the same function, say during a page load, so if we add the load function in our script here, SvelteKit will instead render the +error svelte page file. And here's what that page looks like with no styling, since we have Tailwind CSS stripping everything out. But we can alter the look of this page by just adding it to our routes folder in our app like this, and then creating any design we want. We can just include the built-in page status and page error message variables where we want them. And here it is looking a little nicer. And then let's check out unexpected errors. Unexpected errors again can be any code that throws a standard JavaScript error, or it can be syntax related or maybe type mismatches and so on. Let's remove our errors function from our form script and instead throw a JavaScript error. Now you'll see that the user sees an internal error message only, but in the console we can see the actual error we set. This is helpful if you're still developing your code, but not when it's live, as you won't be able to see the errors. When it's live, you'll probably want to log these somewhere, like in a file or a database, and I'll show you how to do that here in a bit. But an unexpected error can be caused by syntax or type issues as well. So for example, if we try to do a string function on a number variable, we also get the internal error on the screen and the real error down in the console. Now to track these hidden errors, we can use Svelte's hook.svelte.ts file to do this. In this file, they have a handle error function you can add. And in this function, we could potentially save the error to a file on the server or perhaps to a database. With this function, either way, we still need to return the error back so that the page gets generated. And you can need to log it to the console manually too, if you still want that. But notice with this, we can change the message the user sees. We can change it from internal error to something more user-friendly. And finally, let's go over try-catch blocks. If you've noticed, we haven't seen any of those yet in our examples, but you definitely want to use them if you ever wanted to catch an unexpected error and convert it to a nicer format, like our red notification box that we have. This would also stop your code from getting directed to the error page, and it would keep the user on the page they were on. So for example, let's say on our form submission script, we wanted to try to save something to the database, but today our database happens to be down. Here I have my PostgreSQL helper function for interacting with my database, but in the background I didn't provide the credentials, so it's going to fail. And you can check out my database video for more details on how this file and the SQL stuff works. But typically, with either module you use, they're going to throw unexpected errors when things like this happens. And your user would see the internal error, or in our case, an error occurred message like this, which isn't very helpful. Instead, we could wrap the database code in a try-catch block, and if an error is thrown, we can show a more descriptive message instead like this. You still want to avoid showing the real message, as it might contain sensitive things like the server name or stuff like that. And finally, let's talk about how errors should be handled in API endpoints. If you plan on having an API endpoint in your app, like this user endpoint that we're making, that's going to look for GET requests. You for sure don't want that default Svelte error page to show up. API endpoints typically return JSON, and throwing an error like this would instead return a full-on HTML page, which would be bad for your API users, as their code probably wouldn't know what to do with that. So here we can wrap anything that might throw an error in our API in a try-catch block, and if any error occurs, we'll instead return valid JSON. So that's about it. Hopefully this helps you understand how to better handle errors in your apps. And if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching.